If you search for the game Dark Castle today, you'll probably find videos of people making fun of it. Sluggish gameplay from the DOS version, awkward controls on the Genesis, clips that make the game look clumsy and frustrating. But those aren't the versions that made Dark Castle famous. Cut back to the original Macintosh version and it's a completely different experience. Smooth animation, crisp sound effects, and gameplay built around precise timing and control. In fact, if you only ever played the ports, you never really played Dark Castle. Back in the late 1980s, this game was considered the gold standard of action games on the Mac. It helped define what early Mac gaming could feel like. And yet somehow, over the years, it nearly disappeared, more than once. This is a story of how Dark Castle was built, lost, and eventually brought back again. To understand Dark Castle, you have to start with the company behind it, Silicon Beach Software. Silicon Beach was founded in the mid-1980s by software entrepreneur Charlie Jackson, right at a time when the Apple Macintosh was still finding its identity. Most developers were treating the Mac like a serious office machine, something for spreadsheets, word processing, and desktop publishing. Silicon Beach saw something else entirely. They treated the Macintosh like a creative playground. From the beginning, their software showed a level of polish that was unusual on the platform. Games like Enchanted Scepters and Airborne demonstrated how expressive the Macintosh could be, and Silicon Beach's real sound system allowed recorded audio to play through the Mac's tiny speaker, something that really made their software stand out. But Silicon Beach wasn't interested in churning out cheap little releases. Their catalog was small, but every title felt carefully crafted. That approach would lead to two of the most influential Macintosh games of the decade, Dark Castle and its sequel, Beyond Dark Castle. The company's time in the gaming industry was surprisingly short. By the end of the decade, Silicon Beach had shifted towards multimedia software and was eventually acquired by Aldus Corporation, which later became a part of Adobe. But during that brief window in the 1980s, Silicon Beach helped prove that the Macintosh could be more than just a business computer. And in 1986, they built a castle. Silicon Beach's Dark Castle quickly became one of the defining action games on the Macintosh. At first glance, the setup seems simple. You play as a hero trying to defeat the mysterious Black Knight. But to stand a chance against him, you first have to collect two important power-ups, the Fireball and the Shield. To find them, you explore the castle's 14 rooms. Everything begins in a central hub called the Great Hall, where you choose which part of the castle to tackle next. Most players start with the shield rooms, which are accessed through the door on the right. These stages send you through a series of challenges as you climb higher into the castle, eventually earning the shield that helps protect you from the castle's constant barrage of projectiles. The doors on the left lead to the Fireball rooms, but they're randomized. This path is more focused on platforming, sending you through several dangerous stages as you work your way towards earning the Fireball ability. And if you fall down a pit along the way, the game throws you into a chaotic stage called Trouble, where you have to get the key and break out of the dungeon. Once you've collected both power-ups, the path in the center leads to the Black Knight rooms, where the game's final challenges and the castle ruler are waiting. But what really set Dark Castle apart was how it's played. Movement used the now familiar WASD keyboard layout, where the mouse controlled the character's arm, letting you aim and throw rocks with surprising precision. It was a control scheme that felt incredibly natural on the Macintosh, and it made the gameplay all about timing and accuracy. And the castle was anything but empty. You had to dodge falling boulders, swarms of bats, castle guards, even a fire-breathing dragon. The game had a steep learning curve, but it was rarely unfair. Success came from practice and mastery, not random luck. You can see influences from arcade classics like Donkey Kong, Galaga, and Pitfall, but Dark Castle filtered those ideas through the Macintosh itself, combining keyboard movement with mouse-controlled attacks in a way that felt perfectly suited to the Mac. Graphically, it pushed the compact Mac's 512x342 resolution, and it featured digitized voice clips and sound effects that were surprisingly impressive for the time. Again, it is a difficult game, but it wasn't unfair. It simply demanded mastery. After the release of Dark Castle, Silicon Beach did what great developers do. They didn't just make a sequel, they evolved the idea. Just 1 year later, Silicon Beach Software followed up with Beyond Dark Castle. And rather than just simply repeating the formula, they expanded it in almost every direction. The core goal is still the same, defeat the Black Knight. But this time the castle feels much larger and more mysterious. Instead of selecting rooms from the Great Hall, the game centers around a new hub called the Ante Room. From here, players explore different parts of the castle in search of 5 magical orbs. Each orb must be retrieved and brought back to the anteroom. Only after collecting all 5 do you unlock the path to the Black Knight's chamber. This structure changed the rhythm of the game completely. The castle feels less like a series of isolated challenges and more like a place you're exploring. Some of the stages even featured scrolling environments, and the rooms themselves are far more varied, from underground tunnels to tall vertical towers. One of the most memorable additions is the computer room, which acts as the game's save system. Instead of opening a menu, you physically enter the room and pull a lever to save or restore your progress. It's a small detail, but it shows how thoughtfully the game was designed. Even saving your game is part of the world itself. In many ways, this is where Dark Castle stopped feeling like a pure arcade challenge and started feeling more like an adventure. It also marked the end of an era. Beyond Dark Castle would be the final major game released by Silicon Beach before the company shifted away from game development. And after that, things started to get complicated. After the success of the Macintosh releases, the rights to Dark Castle began to spread beyond the original developers. Ports of the game were licensed out and handled by other companies, most notably 360 Pacific. These new versions brought the game to several different platforms, including DOS, the Commodore 64, the Amiga, and eventually the Sega Genesis. The problem was that the original creators weren't involved, and Dark Castle turned out to be a game that was extremely sensitive to how it was implemented. The Macintosh version had been carefully designed around its controls, timing, and presentation, and once those elements changed, the entire experience started to fall apart. Across the various ports, the quality was widely inconsistent. Physics behaved differently, sound effects lost their punch, controls often felt sluggish or imprecise, and visually, many versions struggled to capture the personality of the original Macintosh release. Over time, these ports became the versions that many players encountered first, and with the rise of online reviews and retro gaming videos, those flawed versions often shaped how people understood the game. It's an interesting contrast to something like Prince of Persia, where careful porting helped preserve the original experience across many systems. With Dark Castle, the opposite happened, and for many players, these ports became the real Dark Castle, and unfortunately, they were bad. But while those versions were spreading across other platforms, the Macintosh side of the series continued evolving quietly. After the wave of uneven ports in the late 80s and early 90s, the future of Dark Castle became uncertain. The rights to the game had changed hands as part of a larger business shift. Silicon Beach Software had been acquired by Aldus Corporation. Sometime later, another Macintosh-focused developer stepped in. Delta Tau Software secured the rights to the game and decided to bring it back. The result was Color Dark Castle. Rather than simply updating the graphics, Delta Tau performed a complete rewrite of the original game to run properly on newer Macintosh systems, including the emerging PowerPC Macs. The familiar castle returned with the same rooms, enemies, and overall structure, but this time the game was presented in full color. Even so, the developers made an interesting choice. Despite the move to color hardware, the game still ran at the original 512 by 342 resolution used by the compact Macintosh computers. On those early machines, the resolution filled the entire screen. But on newer Macs with much larger displays, the game actually appeared in a smaller window in the middle of the desktop. It preserved the original layout perfectly, but it also meant the game never fully took advantage of the newer hardware. The game also had a slightly different feel to the 1986 version, but in spirit, it was unmistakably Dark Castle. The release itself was fairly low-key. Most copies were sold through mail order, and boxed versions were relatively rare, giving the game a bit of a cult status among Macintosh collectors. For a moment, it looked like Dark Castle had found its place again, and then the series went quiet. For more than a decade after Color Dark Castle, the series seemed to fade quietly into Macintosh history. The original games were still remembered fondly by longtime fans, but there hadn't been a true new entry in the series since the late 1980s. Then, after years of rumors and delays, the castle doors finally opened again. In 2008, Return to Dark Castle was released for Mac OS X. The game was developed by Z-Sculpt Entertainment and published by Super Happy Fun Fun, a company that included the original Dark Castle designer and artist, Mark Steven Pierce. Rather than simply remaking the original, Return to Dark Castle was designed as a hybrid sequel and remake. The story continues after the events of Beyond Dark Castle, but the game also brings the entire legacy of the series together. Every room from the original Dark Castle and Beyond Dark Castle returns, recreated in color with updated graphics. On top of that, the developers added around 50 completely new rooms, turning the castle into a much larger adventure than anything seen in the earlier games. Despite the visual upgrades, the developers clearly understood what made the originals special. The gameplay kept the tight physics and precise timing that defined the Macintosh versions. In many ways, Return to Dark Castle felt like a celebration of the entire series, a modern sequel that respected the mechanics and spirit of the originals while expanding the scope of the castle itself. But there was one problem. Like many Mac games of that era, Return to Dark Castle was built as a 32-bit application. And in 2019, when Apple released Mac OS Catalina, support for 32-bit software was completely removed. Almost overnight, the game stopped working on modern Macs. And once again, the future of Dark Castle was uncertain. For a while, it looked like Return to Dark Castle might suffer the same fate as many classic Mac games, quietly disappearing as the platform moved on. But the story didn't end there. In March of 2026, nearly 18 years after the original 2008 release, the game returned once again, this time rebuilt using the Unity game engine. The goal wasn't to reinvent the game, but to preserve it. The new version aims to be as close to a one-to-one recreation of the 2008 Mac release as possible, keeping the same gameplay, physics, and structure that longtime fans remember. The difference is now that it runs on modern systems. The Unity version launched on Steam, making the game playable on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and it was also released on the Mac App Store. For the first time in the game's history, Dark Castle was no longer tied to a single platform. In a way, the game had nearly vanished twice. Once when poor ports distorted its reputation, and again when platform changes threatened to leave it behind. But this time, the castle was rebuilt on something more durable. Now, Dark Castle isn't dependent on 1980s Macintosh hardware, and it's no longer trapped in the 32-bit era. For the first time, the series has a future that isn't tied to a single machine. Looking back, Dark Castle has had a remarkable journey. It helped define Macintosh gaming in the 1980s, with precise controls, expressive animation, and a level of polish that stood out on the platform. But its legacy became complicated. Poor ports gave many players the wrong first impression, the original studio disappeared, and later changes to the Mac itself nearly erased the game entirely. And yet, the castle endured. Decades later, the game still survives, rebuilt and playable again on modern systems. In the end, Dark Castle isn't just a game. It's a reminder of how fragile digital history can be, and how easily a classic can be misunderstood. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks so much for your time today. Goodbye.